Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to discuss the top 10 books that I've read so far in 2020. I've read so many 4 and 5-star reads. Before we get started, I'll mention what I'm drinking today. It's a beer from a local brewery called Wren House here in Phoenix, and it's Big Spill Pils. It's a dry hop pilsner, amazing, easy to drink. Yeah, I love it so much. It's kind of like their staple beer that they won awards for and everything. So if you're either in the Phoenix area or if you're ever visiting, if quarantine ever ends, definitely check out Wren House if you're interested in beer at all. You can't go wrong with any beer that they have. They're my favorite brewery, hands down. So yeah. Oh, and I guess I'll show my cute little cup. My mom got me this. This is Jalen's Ale, drink, enjoy, repeat. So let's get started. The first book I want to talk about is Bunny by Mona Awad. This was the first book I finished in 2020. I started it at the end of 2019 and finished it, I think, on New Year's Day, so I'm gonna count it for this year. This book is a literary horror satire of sorts. It's about a girl named Samantha, and she's in an MFA program at an elite New England university. I can't remember which one. It's supposed to be like pretty explicit which university it is, but I can't remember off the top of my head. So she's in this MFA program, and she's a very reserved person, and she's in this cohort, a fiction cohort, with these other girls that are extremely annoying and cliquey. Think, you know, Mean Girls, Heathers kind of situation. She eventually gets involved with those girls that are in her cohort, and I don't want to say too much about what ensues, but basically they engage in these seances of sorts called smut salons, and it involves blood and bunny rabbits and boys, and that's all I'll say. But I thought this novel was brilliant. I didn't know if it was just going to be purely like humorous. I thought it was very sad, actually. By the end of it, it deals with themes of loneliness and isolation and what your imagination will do when you're in that state of mind, when you're, you know, kind of by yourself, secluded and kind of on your own, what your brain does to compensate for that. It's gory and it's super funny, but it's not anything like insane. I think if you're looking for something kind of on the horror side, but is still pretty literary and not too like over the top or anything. Well, it's over the top. It's pretty crazy of a book, but I think this is a good one to try out. Maybe save it for like Halloween time or something. This is definitely what I'm always looking for in a book that's kind of weird and out there, deals with themes of loneliness and isolation. I find myself really enjoying books that talk about those. I'm not really sure why, but they just kind of hit it for me. So yeah, definitely check this one out if it sounds interesting to you. I know it has Margaret Atwood's stamp of approval as well. I think it just came out in paperback too, and I know that they're making it into a TV show, I think on AMC, I'm pretty sure, so I would definitely read it before that comes out. I can't wait to see how they handle this book, because there's a lot of crazy shit that happens in it. So yeah. The most recent book that I finished that's in my stack is The Vanishing Half by Bennett. It's been all over BookTube, Bookstagram. Everyone's reading it right now, as they should. It follows two twins in the 60s that are from this small town called Mallard. The story follows the twins as they grow up, and they eventually split apart. You follow their life throughout multiple generations, and you see the perspectives of their kids and the people that they fall in love with, and it's just a mind-blowing novel. I couldn't believe how, it's not too long, but I feel like it was, you know, like epic in scope, because there's so much that she covers in so little pages, and I feel like I really knew all of these characters. I think even the minor characters are critical to the novel on one hand, but they also, I think they're fully developed, even if they don't take up that many pages of the book, especially the twins as kids. I really love that storyline and how they eventually bring the sisters back together near the end. So I highly recommend this one if you haven't read it already. I mentioned in my Bookstagram review, I really think this might have a shot at winning the Pulitzer, or will at least get a nod, be a finalist. It's that good. It feels like an instant classic, and it's also coming to HBO as a TV show. Can't wait to see how they do it. I can't not see it being in my wrap up for the year as one of my top 5 favorites, I would say. The next book I want to mention is Apartment by Teddy Wayne. This one took me completely by surprise. Similarly to Bunny, it involves students in an MFA program, but there's no horror involved. But by the end of it, I was horrified without there being violence. So let me explain. So this book deals with an unnamed narrator who's in an MFA program. He finds himself struggling in the program to stand out among his peers. The book opens when they're in a seminar or a workshop in which the narrator's work is being, you know, shredded to pieces, but there's another student in the class. His name is Billy. He's there on a scholarship, so he comes from a more poor background, and he's the only one that comes to his defense about his work. And you later learn that Billy is a star student. He's an amazing writer. He's just naturally gifted, and everyone loves his work in class. And Billy and the narrator become friends, and they move in together, and they stay in an apartment that is subsidized by the narrator's, I believe, grandmother. You watch their friendship develop, and the narrator becomes very attached to Billy, and eventually the friendship starts crumbling for reasons that I won't go into. And the end completely shocked me. It left me feeling very off and upset, and it's so good. I don't want to say anything more about it because I think it deserves to be read. I think it's under 200 pages. It is. So it's a quick read, but it's very deep, and there's a lot to unpack in this book. And I think it's just perfect for discussion. So highly recommend if you're looking for like a literary thriller of sorts. But it's not a thriller per se. There's no like violence, there's no murder, but it was riveting. And I tend to love books that involve writers. And so if you like books about that, I think this one's one to pick up. And if you like books also about, being alone and looking for, companionship and the effects that has on a person, this will be your jam. Similar to Bunny in a lot of ways, just without rabbits and blood and stuff. So highly recommend this one. I can't wait to read his first book, Loner. After reading this, it completely blew me away. And the cover is very cool and pretty. The next book I want to discuss is Hurricane Season by Fernanda Melchor. This is probably the hardest book I've ever read. It's very bleak and it's full of violence. It's about the murder of a woman in a small town that's impoverished in Mexico, and she's known as the witch. You don't really know why to start, but each chapter, the majority of the book is told in 4 chapters. Each chapter is essentially a novella in which you follow a different character who has some sort of connection to the murder of the witch, and by the end you figure out who killed her and what led up to it. And in the meantime, within each novella or chapter, you learn about each character's story. I mean, while the book is about a murder, each person goes through so much, and there's so much presented here. This book is full of trigger warnings all over the place, but I felt it was a very rewarding read, and I'm glad I read it. It wasn't enjoyable by any means, but I thought it was completely original. Fernanda Melchor, she writes in each chapter or novella is basically one paragraph, and she writes in these long sweeping sentences, but the way she crafts those sentences, it flows as if you're just reading like a normal book, I guess, if that makes any sense. She holds nothing back in this book, and she does it intentionally and to make you uncomfortable and to approach subjects such as femicide and homophobia and addiction and countless others with no filter, and it's necessary to her story, and I thought it was just expertly done. I've seen it quite a bit on Bookstagram, not as much as I would like to, but this is a hard sell, I guess, during these times when everything is already so depressing and bleak. I can totally understand why someone wouldn't want to read this because it will only add to your sadness, likely, but I think as a piece of fiction, it's incredible, and I highly recommend it if you're looking for something challenging and original. It's translated from Spanish, and she has another collection coming out soon from New Directions. It's a short story collection, so I can't wait to see what she does next. So yeah, check this one out if you think you can brave it, despite all the things I just said. Next, I want to talk about my favorite memoir that I read this year. I'm going to break my own rules of talking about 10 books. I'm going to talk about 11, I guess, but I really loved both of these memoirs. I feel like it's unfair to compare memoirs or like rate them really against each other. I feel like it's necessary to respect each person's story and how they choose to tell it, and it just feels inappropriate to me. So I'll talk first about How We Fight for Our Lives by Saeed Jones. I absolutely loved this book. It's a brilliant memoir. He writes incredibly, and he tells his story as growing up as a black gay man. Just was completely riveted throughout the entire thing. And I also follow Saeed Jones on Twitter, and he's funny as hell, and I just really loved reading his work, and I want to get more into him. I know he writes poetry as well, which I haven't read yet, but this is a beautiful memoir and definitely something you should read. I think it's necessary for sure. Another memoir I absolutely loved, I've talked about it I think in like every video so far that I've made, is In the Dream House by Carmen Machado. Sorry if you've watched my other videos and that you already heard the synopsis of this, but I'll just give it one more time. It's a memoir about Machado's experience in a queer domestic abusive relationship. She uses each chapter as a different narrative trope to tell her story, whether that be erotica or choose your own adventure or sci-fi thriller or plot twist. She uses over 100 throughout this memoir, and I thought it was so cool, like reading about her experience through the lens of these different narrative tropes. With that said, it's a very dark and hard read, but she tells it so beautifully, and I really, I was just completely blown away by her writing skill, but also the way that she was able to analyze her relationship through these different lenses, which must have been a really tough exercise to do in trying to figure out how she can talk about it through these different ways. But I think it also illuminates the severity of her situation that she went through and the struggle of getting out of it. And I just thought it was so beautiful, and I highly recommend it. It's one of the most original and mind-blowing books I've ever read, and if you like memoirs, this is a must-read, absolutely. Yeah, so definitely check this one out. Please add it to your TBR, it's so good. So the next few books I've already talked about in at least one or two of my other videos, but I'm gonna mention them here again. The first being Death in Her Hands by Ottessa Moshfegh. I keep talking about this book in like every video, but I just loved it so much, so bear with me. This book is Ottessa Moshfegh's take on a murder mystery in which a 72-year-old woman named Vesta, she's going on a walk in the woods with her dog, and she finds a note which says, her name was Magda, nobody will ever know who killed her, it wasn't me, here's her dead body. And so you follow Vesta as she tries to solve this murder while there's no evidence of the murder. And as the novel goes on, you learn more about Vesta's past and how that is impacting her present and her delusions and her attempts to use her imagination to solve this in a traditional, like Agatha Christie style way. And by the end of it, I was glued to the pages because I couldn't believe what was going on. It was a brutal ending in a sense, and I am still unpacking it to this day. And I think the reason why I keep recommending this so much, not only because I loved it, but because I want to keep discussing this book with everyone, because it's so strange and different, and there's a lot to unpack by the ending. And I think it's intentionally ambiguous, and I would just love to talk to anyone that has read this and get their thoughts on it. I think if you've read her other books, you kind of know what to expect with this. You have a very Moshfeghian narrator, even though I think she's more likable than some of the others. And you kind of get that weird, sharp, comic prose that's expected in all of her books. So highly recommend this one if you like weird stuff like I do. And again, this is another book that's about loneliness and isolation and what your imagination will do if you are lonely. And so it's kind of a running theme to the books I really like this year. And I think it'd be kind of fun to unpack that a little bit further in another video maybe, and try to find some threads through all of them. I know Alex from What Page Are You On BookTube, he did a video about loneliness in literature, and I would love to kind of do a similar style video with some books that I've read and kind of add on to this conversation, because I think it's very interesting and it's a cool narrative device to use to illuminate something greater about characters or society or something. So yeah, definitely like this one. I want to reread it very soon because I got a finished copy down there. You can see it in the corner, but I want to mark up my arc and see kind of what I can find on a reread. So I'll probably be doing that by the end of the year. Next book I want to discuss is Luster. It's a debut novel about a young Black woman named Edie who's trying to discover herself in her early 20s. And she gets involved in an open marriage, and she's an artist, and she's just trying to find her way through that relationship and discover herself. And it's just a brilliant book. There's so many passages in here that I was just like, my mind was blown. I didn't expect it to be as deep as it was. I don't think the synopsis does it as much justice as it deserves. It sounds like it might just be kind of like a rom-com kind of book about, you know, a woman getting involved in an open marriage, but it's definitely not the case. It's a very deep and complex book that discusses, you know, class and race and identity, and I just completely loved it. And I think this one's going to be all over the place in August. So definitely keep an eye out for it. Please pre-order it from a Black-owned bookstore. That'd be awesome. I think she's gonna be like the next big author down the line. So yeah, I don't know. I can't rave about this book enough. Just please read it. It's so good. So finally, I'll keep talking about it all year, but hopefully I'll have a little break until like the end of year wrap-up videos. But it is Real Life by Brandon Taylor. I love this book to death. It is so good. It is about a young Black gay graduate student who's getting his degree in science. It takes place over a 3-day weekend in which he has various encounters with his friends and allegedly straight man who he is sexually involved with. It's about him trying to discover himself and determine whether he should be in this graduate program when he experiences numerous microaggressions against him by his peers. There's a very juicy dinner scene in here, which I was riveted by, and there's just so many great insights in here. Also, you should follow him on Twitter because he's hilarious and he has hot takes like on the daily, which I love. So yeah, definitely read this book. I'm gonna keep talking about it, so Sorry if you don't like me ranting about the same book over and over again, but I just really want everyone to read this book because I think it's so good and it deserves all the praise that it's already received, and I hope it keeps getting that praise. It's just phenomenal. So yes, please read Real Life. The next book I want to talk about is Wow, No Thank You by Samantha Irby. I love this book so much. I talked about it in my mid-year freakout tag, and I called it a book that made me happy because it definitely did. It's a collection of essays in which Samantha Irby discusses numerous topics, whether that be home improvement or going out on a night on the town when you're older and you don't really feel like doing it because you realize how annoying it is. She also uses essays that involve lists, which I really enjoyed. I think my favorite of the collection was one called Hello 911, in which it's a list of phone calls to the police about various annoying or awkward situations she's found herself in that many of us have found ourselves in which you want to just call the police because you want to get out of it. So I thought it was so good, and I really think she is a really promising essayist, and I can't wait to read her first two books. I haven't read them yet, but this one was I think a great introduction, even though it's her third book. I definitely want to listen to those because I really liked listening to this one on audiobook. She has a really great narration, and telling her own stories, it just makes sense to kind of listen to her to tell them, especially because it's so comedic and she has that comedic inflection when she tells them. So highly recommend checking those out on audiobook if you like those. And another book I want to talk about is The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix. It's about a group of women who are in a book club together, and they read true crime books and discuss them, and a vampire moves to town. The book follows, the main character, Patricia, as she tries to convince everyone else that this man is a vampire based on her interactions with him, and eventually, taking down that vampire. It's such a fun read. I love horror books, and this one was a little bit more on the literary side. There's some depth and complexity to it, in which Hendrix covers some topics such as race and class and gaslighting. Overall, it was just a fun read. There's so many creepy scenes in this book that really got to me. There's one scene in particular involving a cockroach, and that's like my biggest fear of all time. And when I was reading it, I had to set it aside because I just couldn't handle it anymore. It was just, he doesn't just, describe something creepy, he really lays it on. And with Halloween coming up, this would be a perfect read for October. So if you're looking for anything kind of horror, that one I think is the best horror book that I've read this year so far. So yeah, that about wraps up my top 10 books of 2020 so far. Let me know in the comments if you've read any of these, if you've enjoyed them or not. I would love to discuss each of these. And if you haven't read any of these, or if you're adding some of these to your TBR, I really hope you enjoy them. I apologize in advance if you don't like them. I know some of these are, tougher reads or kind of divisive. So yeah, I hope you really find something that you like in the stack. And so yeah, I'll see you all next time. Cheers.